You're listening to a Pop House Network podcast for developers by developers. Welcome to Java Pop House episode 102. Hey everyone. We took a little winter break over the holidays, but we're back at a new edition of the Java Pop House. And, you know, for those who are tuning in for the very first time, you have 101 episodes to catch up on. But my name is Freddy Guime. I'm one of the distinguished principal engineers at Expedia Group. Speaker, author, presenter, Java champion. And I'm here with my usual suspect.
Hi, everybody. It's Bob Paulin, independent consultant from Chicago, Apache Software Foundation member, Java champion, and CJUG board chair.
And here we have a special guest, Dan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dan Vega. I'm a Spring developer advocate at VMware, also a speaker, a course creator, YouTuber, all-around content creator, and I am coming to you from right outside Cleveland, Ohio.
Is it very? It's being cold right now in the Midwest, wasn't it?
Very cold, yes. I made a joke on Twitter the other day. I'm thankful that I still have my Intel-based MacBook because it acts as a heater and it keeps me warm here in the winter. So
you just have it plug into like the central air,
just
like
sitting on my lap whenever I need it.
Oh, that's funny. Oh gosh, yeah, no, that is okay. Yeah, at least in the West Coast, it got cold, but it's still, I don't think it's as cold. You know, we're still.
No, I was just out in San Francisco last week, and you know, people were wearing parkas when it's 60 degrees outside, and I'm in shorts outside running.
That's t-shirt weather.
Yeah, that's my situation too. So, but yeah, no, it's actually been a mild winter out here. This is the first like really significant snow that's stuck around for us. So
knocking on wood.
Yeah, right. It's February. It's at that point where you start getting sick of winter, but
yes, very much so.
I think March is when usually I get my cabin fever all the way up.
Yeah, there's a point in March when we spring the clocks forward, and I look forward to that every single year because then it's light out longer, and I know like we're past all that bad stuff, and I can start running outside again. So
yeah,
looking forward to it.
It's coming.
Before we dive in, I wanted to thank our sponsor, Datadog. Today's show is sponsored by Datadog, a monitoring and analytics platform that integrates with over 450 technologies, including AWS services, Docker, and Kubernetes. Datadog's platform brings together metrics, traces, and logs in one place, so you can get full visibility into your environment and improve your application performance. With machine learning-based alerts, customizable dashboards, and distributed tracing, Datadog makes it easy to unify disparate data sources so you can troubleshoot faster. Start your free Datadog trial today. Listeners of this podcast will receive a free t-shirt once you install the agent and create one dashboard. Visit javapophouse.com/Datadog to get started. Again, that URL is javapophouse.com/Datadog. And, we thank them for being a sponsor of the show and keeping the mics on and the beer/coffee flowing. So give them a shot at javapophouse.com/Datadog. All right. So there's big news on the ecosystem, right? If you're a Java developer, and if you just happen to run into the most popular framework in the Java ecosystem, you may have noticed that there was a version update. And this is not a patch. This is not a minor. It's a major, right? So for those who don't know, Spring Boot, I think it went from like what was the last one? 2.7?
2.7x somewhere. I think 2.74.
Now they actually released Spring Boot 3, and which is, essentially Boot is almost like the bomb of all the Spring projects. Underneath it, like I think the Spring Framework itself went from 5 to Spring Framework 6. Correct?
That's correct. Yep.
So like with any major version changes, it comes with a lot of like new goodies, things to like look forward to, and also you know that this is not a release also that you I don't think it's that painful, but it is. I mean, every major release, there is like kinks that you need to work out. So and Dan is being part of our like sort of like our spring inner circle is here to tell us all about it and what are the fun things and exciting things that's on spring that they have in store for 6.
Yep. Yeah, so I would say right off the bat, Spring Framework 6, Spring Boot 3 was released last year in 2022 in November. And, I've been at conferences, at meetups, at virtual conferences all around the country talking to people about it. And I think one of the things I always start with is it's a great time to be a Java developer and a Spring developer, right? Java has really for a while kind of was stagnant. And then kind of Java 8 came out. And I think the release cadence that we moved to really kind of changed the perception of Java and kind of its trajectory, because I can't remember a better time than now than it has been to be a Java developer. So I think there's we're in an exciting time, but I think that's only going to continue to get better as we move forward.
Oh, there's toys everywhere. So
yeah.
Yes. All right. So what is like I guess like what do you think is like the biggest news or the biggest change on the Spring framework?
Well, I think we could start there with Java and the JDK. So when we announced the Spring Framework 6 and what it would be, I think one of the first things we kind of talked about is that a baseline would be JDK 17. At the time, everybody in the industry was still on Java 8, and they said, oh no, how are we going to move from 8 to 17? And I think, at the time it was perceived as kind of an aggressive move, but, Java 17 was released in September of 2021. We are currently on JDK 19. JDK 20 is coming out next month? We'll have JDK 21 by the end of the year. So if you look at it from that timeline, it's really hasn't been that big of an aggressive move. And I think, the Spring framework is kind of helping the Java ecosystem as a whole kind of move forward, which we all need to get off of 8. So anything we can do to move that forward.
And did you guys stop at 11, or is it a straight from 8, require 8 to 17 move?
No, you could have been on 11. You could have even been on 11 or 17 in 2.7.
Sure.
Those were supported, but the baseline is Java 17. Like you can't be on anything before that.
Oh no, I guess I was asking for, but you could be on 8 before this. So I mean, basically your compiler target was 8 before. So yes. I guess, when you think about all the things that were added between 8 and 17, there's a whole lot of programming idioms and things that were in 8. Is there any specific ones that you would call out that say, hey, the Spring team is using this a lot on the source, and that's why 17 was so exciting for us? Or is it more just about the runtime?
Well, you pointed that out. It wasn't just for anyone using the Spring framework. It was for the Spring team being able to write better code, right? Like now we're on this base, we, like you said, when we moved from 8 to 17, we got to take advantage of so many changes in the language, let alone the performance and security changes that happened between then. But I know one that sticks out to me that I know is being used a lot is records. I'm a big fan of records. I use them in all of my applications whenever I can. And I know the Spring team has used them wherever possible. So yes, there is a large list. I have slides somewhere of like, here are all like the major features from 8 to 17. And you just look at this list and go, wow, it's been a lot. So you're getting a lot out of the box if you're moving from 8 to 17.
Yeah, just to cover, if you're not familiar with records, I mean, records was the idiom that was added with, I want to say it's post 11 or was 11 where it was.
It was like around 14 went into preview.
Yeah, that's where I'm feeling too. So, but it's basically immutable data types where, you set them in the constructor and it stays that way. It's one of those steps on the way to Valhalla, I feel like, because they're looking for those data structures that can start to be, getting closer to a struct rather than an object sort of approach, but still supporting objects under the covers.
And I think one of the things that, the Java, the JDK team heard was, okay, hey, Java gets a bad rap for being a little bit too verbose. And a lot of that is just these simple data classes, right? You have 5 or 10 fields in there, and then you have all these getters and setters and a toString and a hash code. And like, new developers look at that and you maybe don't realize that, oh, I could just use my ID to kind of generate a lot of that code. But they look at that and go, oh, it's a lot of code I got to write just to like have a class that represents like a product in my system.
Yeah,
and so just having a record where you just declare a few properties and you're good to go. So yeah, I think it's been an awesome welcome change.
No, it's interesting because like you always hear like that. It's like, oh, Java's so verbose and all these things, but it's like, but there is so much TLC on the language. Like, is being done on purpose, right? Like, so yeah, seeing records. It's not that it couldn't have been done before. It's a lot of it was like, how can we do it in the right way that it doesn't affect your previous code and it's the best contribution to the language that we can make, right?
Right.
So yeah, I think it technically is is it unmodified? No, is it immutable but not unmodifiable? It's one of the two. Where
it is immutable for sure. Because as Bob said, once you kind of create an instance of that class, there are no setters, so you can't change that value after the fact it's been created. So
no, so I think that technically that is unmodifiable.
Yes.
Because like if you can have a list within the record and then you can change it, right? But
you can, no,
I'm splitting hairs because that's what I love. But yeah, no, that is true. Like actually, like even if it's immutable or modifiable, it's great for multi-threading. It makes your code immediately safe. These are like concerns, especially either until we get lightweight threads where you can have one thread for the whole thing and you don't have to worry about anything. Like a lot of people move into the reactive space and having these kind of structures, make sure that's kind of like the first thing that I see, like when we're working on a code base that have like reactive, that is like, I need to like be like, no, you need to make sure this bean is thread safe because you don't even know who's going to pick it up. Right. And they're like, oh, how do you do that? Like just make it.
That's on the list too for Spring, right? So early virtual thread support.
Let's talk about that. So again, the baseline is Java 17. You need to be on at least Java 17. If you go over to start.spring.io right now and create a new project, you pick your version of Java. We support Java 17, 18, and now even 19. So Project Loom, the part of the thing that we care about with virtual threads, that was introduced in JDK 19. Now, this is just a preview feature. So if you're going to play around with it, you have to do the -- enable preview, right? But it's there in 19, which means you can create a Spring Boot 3 project with Java 19 and take advantage of virtual threads. And this is really depends on the type of workloads you're building, right? So if you're building some type of, Spring MVC app and you're doing some kind of blocking operation. So I'm calling a database, I'm doing some file input, output, anything that's blocking, you're going to be able to take advantage of virtual threads because now we're not tied to that. Hey, a thread is tied to the operating system thread, right? So now we can get a lot of performance benefits out of that. And as you said, you can actually test drive this today. If you head over to spring.io/blog, there is a blog post that one of my colleagues wrote about how to get this up and running in Spring Boot 3 right now. So you can test it out. Again, it's not final, but if everything goes right, it may be in 21 later this year. If it becomes final, we don't have much say on that, but if it became final, it may make it into Spring Framework 6.1 at the end of the year. So we are
that's what I was seeing in
close
GitHub.
attention to it.
So I was just looking at some of the things that you were planning. So first class support for virtual threads targeting for 6.1. To see Jürgen commenting on this is targeting like the REST client as one of the the perfect ideal places to put this, right? So that's a purely Spring thing rather than, a lot of it right now, I think is built into the web containers, your Tomcat, your Undertow, where they have toggles where you can say, hey, let's use virtual threads. And, for me, I've always found the MVC approach to be a lot easier to teach to new developers. So like for a lot of the projects that I'm on, I'll consult my clients. It's like, yeah, you can squeak out that extra performance with React, but if you're not hiring like best in class developers, you might go a little further with MVC and just horizontal scaling. So I've placed my bets on Loom, helping me.
It is a different programming
scaling
style for sure. And as you said, an obvious question raises itself, like, does Loom kind of replace reactive programming? And I don't think so. I think there's still a place for MVC and reactive in the Spring world. Spring Webflux as an architecture is used really great in any time you're using stream-based processing, right? So if you're using stream-based processing, you're probably still going to be in the Webflux world. And then if you're not, it really comes down to, do you like that functional style approach or the imperative programming style?
I have to say, like it grew on me. Like,
yeah,
I used it for a couple projects, and the first part was like, like I couldn't wait until like virtual threads come in, so I don't have to do all this mono to flux and stuff, right? But the part that I did see, which I think there is a value add, is once you have it structured, it's very easy to do. For example, circuit breakers, right? You put a decorator, like
for sure,
in the middle of your mono chain, and boom, it's circuit breaker now. Or you want to do a retry with a fall off strategy, right? It's
right.
more statements on the chain, and you're done, right? Like it's almost like, I know like Spring can have the annotations like for the methods, but this gives you more control on exactly, like you can put in a retry strategy, or how do you want it, like you can create a function that says, retry again, or fall back. So I've been doing a bunch of these things, and it was like, what will have taken me, half a day or a day of like, all right, let's add some kind of circuit breaker logic. It was like, 4 statements for retries, and we're done.
Yep.
So at least what it means is like, I wouldn't move out of React if your project is on React. Like it's right. It works. It has its benefit. It's not that you're going to have any like performance detriment by not using virtual threads. So let it be. Enjoy it.
Yeah, and I think it's great that you have the choice. I mean, again, whatever you're trying to do, we have a solution for you. So pick the style that is going to fit you. So yeah, I'm excited about it. Just to mention that though, if you're and as you said, if you're not doing anything blocking, so if you're just in a CPU intense program that's not calling out to a database or not calling some other service, you're not going to get any benefits out of it, but you're also not going to do any harm. You're just not going to see the benefits that you would in, say, an MVC app where there's a lot of blocking operations going on.
Yeah, I think another thing to highlight is once virtual threads become a thing, it's almost like even the way you treat multi-threading is different, right? Like it was interesting because I think I think it was Brian Getz or somebody who was like you don't ask how many threads your program has. It's like asking how many strings are you going to use. Like so you like, because before that, right? Like before Project Loom, we used to have these kind of like intermittent structures. We used to have thread pool executors, and we had like this queues and blocking queues, and almost like lease and release things for these threads, because that is the only way that we could deal with all these like high number of threads, little number of CPU cores, right? So even if you go back to like your traditional MVC, know that it's not just like, I just need to program it. It's almost like now there's 3 programming models. There's before Loom, regular like MVC. There is reactive if you jump in the bandwagon, and there is after Loom MVC, which is like, forget about thread pools, get rid of all that. Don't do it. Don't make those kind of like fancy things. You now just read and write and do whatever you want on the thread that you're in, and that's it.
Yeah, and I think everybody's looking for kind of a magic pill to kind of fix all their problems, and it's probably not going to be that. It's going to help for sure, but it's going to be one of those situations like any other new technology. You're going to want to test out, put it in a test environment, throw some load on it, see what your improvements are. and see if it's something that's going to help you out. So.
Yep.
Yeah,
Always
absolutely. You haven't seen like the silver bullet, benchmarks that are saying that it is a magic pill from anywhere, right? It's all comes down to how your system's working and how your other things are working. So to your point about blocking or versus CPU intensive, it's going to move the problem around, but like it's like the performance improvement advice you get from Brian Getz. It's like, no, make it my problem. Virtual threads is kind of like taking your threading problem and no, make it the VM's problem, right?
Right.
There's definitely a cost. There's going to be a cost to doing that. It's just, is it less than what you would pay by using OS threads?
Yeah. Then try to outsmart the. That is such a great advice. Do not outsmart the JVM. It's try it. It's we dumb. So.
All right. Well, that's definitely one of the more exciting ones for me. And then I guess it probably, if are we good with virtual threads? Because I think the next one's another kind of big one in the scope of the Java world, but it's advanced ahead of time compile and Graal support, I think is another headliner for Spring Framework 6 and Spring Boot. My past experience just using Graal is it's high maintenance, right? It requires a lot of pre-work, a lot of thinking, a lot of tinkering. It's, from somebody that came from using a lot of OSGI in the background, it's like, yep, okay, I move this and then this breaks. And you're constantly kind of tuning things and where your module boundaries are and what you need to include and what you don't need to include. So there's new stuff in Spring Boot 3 and Spring Framework 6 that's hopefully going to make this a little easier.
Yeah, so I'd say if you had to do this yourself in a large application using Graal, like you said, so let's just kind of back up. So this is kind of a change. So normally when we put our applications, out there, we're letting the JVM kind of optimize at runtime, and it does a really, really good job of doing that. What we're doing is we're saying, let's take away all of those kind of computations that have to happen, and let's move that all the way to build time. So we're going to, the price that you're paying is the build time is going to be a lot longer. But what you get out of that now is this native executable that knows all of the code that it's going to touch, right? I think some people kind of get it wrong when they say the Java is not a dynamic language. It very much is. I mean, it is a statically typed language, but you can do a lot of dynamic things at runtime, right? So we kind of take away that dynamic capability and give you a native image that can run on whatever platform that you want to run it on. So because we're doing that, now we have all of the performance improvements that come with that. So now we get it takes up a lot less memory and it starts up a lot faster. So that's kind of why we would want to use Graal. Then if you're doing that in your own application, you have to provide hints throughout your application that says, hey, this dynamic thing that I'm doing, you're going to need to know about it at runtime or at build time when we build this application. So you have to do that in your own application. Now, in a Spring application, this is why the ahead of time compilation that the Spring team took on throughout the portfolio of projects is by far the biggest project they've ever taken on, because now they have to go through every single project that we have and provide these hints to the compiler to say, hey, at runtime, you're going to need this thing. I know you can't see it right now, but you're going to need it. And so that makes everything kind of work when we go to build this native image. So it was a huge undertaking, but now we kind of reap the benefits, right? So when we go out and build an MVC application or say like a serverless function in Java or in Spring, when we build our native app, we're not adding those hints. Now we can if we introduce new code that doesn't have those hints already in it, but we don't need to. We get all of that for free. We get to build our image and now we can take that and put it on whatever platform we need it to.
Now, yeah, and you've kind of, go ahead, Freddie.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and you've kind of taken a different approach than some of the other web frameworks out there, like Quarkus, where you see a lot of different forked packages and things like that. You've tried to add it into all of the existing code, so you're not using a different Spring library for your Graal compilation. You're using the open source libraries. Has there been any additional work from the Spring team on things outside of the Spring framework to try to make it more friendly to external libraries as well?
So there is, I don't know the name of it off the top of my head. There's a GraalVM like reachability open source project, and the Spring team, who's been working on this, for the last couple of years, has been the biggest contributor to that project. And that project is providing these hints for not only Spring but other libraries in the Java ecosystem. So yes, there is a project out there that helps with that kind of reachability metadata. And yeah, we've done an awesome job on that project. So really cool to see there.
Okay, yeah, no, I see that at the Oracle GitHub.
Yep.
Yeah. No, so I just wanted to go over real quick, because it's always kind of weird, to understand that Java is a dynamic language, even though it's statically typed. And because usually let's say oh yeah, there is reflection, right? Like you can actually do reflection, which is I have a string of a class name and I can kind of create a real class out of that string. But most people will say but I don't do that, or I don't use that. And they say I don't use any data. And the thing is for example, there are other things that are like that they're not that explicit, right? Like if you have a service loader, right? Like if you ever use XML, poor soul, even though I guess Bruno Borges will love that you use XML. You are using a service loader behind the scenes, and essentially what that is doing is Java doesn't say for example, all these things that are interfaces or even proxies that are I need to know who implemented this interface on my on my code base, right? On my jars. And this happens dynamically because Java does not load. It doesn't load all the jars in memory at the beginning. It only loads what it needs. And it kind of then every time it touches something oh, this is new, then I'll try to load it. And that's sometimes when the class loaders are messed up, that's when you get the class, not class definition found exception, right? So that is the dynamic nature of the Java. And it's so transparent and it's so well done that we really don't think about it. But when it comes to GraalVM, the thing is that Graal needs to have an image needs to know exactly what is all the code that it will ever run, right? Because the thing that happens is that when you're trying to optimize, you're doing all these optimizations, you need to have essentially knowledge of all the things that you need to optimize on. All right. And when you do that, then you need the hints. You need Spring telling you, I'm going to be loading this, even though you might not see it yet.
Yep. Yeah. And I think, the biggest question that comes out of this then is, okay, I have this new thing that I can do. I can build native images, but we also know the JVM is very good at certain workloads. So when do I use what? So that is the biggest question that I always get from, everyone when we talk about this is when would I want to use a native image versus the JVM? And I think, this is obviously something you would want to kind of test out yourself. But there are workloads that this is good for. So I do, I write functions as a service for different cloud providers. So if you write AWS Lambdas, if you write anything for GCP or Azure, this is a great solution for that, because you are getting that low memory footprint and that fast start time, which is in the function world, that is everything. That is why Java's never really been considered a great option for functions as a service, because of that cold start time. That it means everything. You're getting billed a lot more, and especially when you start scaling that up to thousands of instances, those 5 seconds matter a lot. So that's one really good use case for it. On the other spectrum, if you have a service that is standing up all day, that is getting high throughput, doing a lot of work, the JVM is really good at optimizing that for you. So that's, if it's just going to start up once and handle it throughout the day, throughout the month, that's a better workload for the JVM. So it really is depending on what workload you're trying to handle.
Yep. And then you really get to pick your poison now with AWS Lambda, with Snap Start. There's so many different approaches now to the function thing. It's okay, do I go native? Do I use Snap Start with the limitations that are there for the kind of the freezing, the firecracker type VM approach?
Right. Oh, that's right. That's right. The one that keeps your optimizations recorded, right?
Yep. it's great, but if you're doing any random number generation, all of a sudden all your images have the same seed. So there's a couple of gotchas there that you got to think about when you're using Snapstart.
You get some hooks into that though. There are hooks into that runtime, so you can kind of control what happens there. So, but yeah, Snapstart is great.
I haven't thought about that for cryptographic things. That's actually very important.
They put it in the warnings and the materials that you get with it, and if you're not careful with it, another scenario is, what if you have like some way to pull secrets? So I have a database username and password. If that gets, snapshotted on a VM somewhere, then that's going to be static. If you rotate those secrets, then that is never going to change. So those are things that you need to think about when you're dealing with that. Another project in the Java ecosystem is Crack, which does something very similar to that by our friends at Azul. So that's really exciting too. We're hope to see some more on that this year.
All right.
Well, great. So why don't we move to the next one? So that was a lot on Growl. So some of these are maybe not as big as the other features, but when I was reading about them, they kind of raised my eyebrow. So one of the new features, it's a new annotation, HTTP client exchange support. So usually, I do a lot of integration work between HTTP calls that aggregate web services to other places. And, you end up either working with the REST template or the new web client, to set those up. But, we've always had for databases, for Redis, we've always had those repository annotations. It looks like we're bringing that to HTTP now.
Yeah, so REST template and the web client are great. Something with like the REST template, if you just want to make a simple HTTP call, some of the APIs can be a little bit overwhelming. Like, hey, I have all these different options and all these different arguments. I just want to make an HTTP call. How do I do that? And so there was a way to do this in some other projects within like Spring Cloud, but we're bringing this to the Spring framework. And this is called HTTP interfaces. And then what you can do is you can just declare an interface. So I'm going to declare an interface called JSON placeholder client. This is an example I did in a video recently. So this is an interface. So we're not actually adding any implementation here. And you can just define the methods that you're going to create. So I want to say, I want to get a list of blog posts and I would name it, find all, whatever. So that's it. I've just created an interface with a simple abstract method in there, declaring what the type is. And the type is important because underneath the hood, we do use the web client, but it really depends based on the type that you are using as a return type. So in the case of a list of products, that's a blocking call, right? If you decided to have a flux of products, that is a non-blocking call. So we can look at that and kind of infer what you want to do there. So what happens is you write some other kind of factory code wherever you're going to create this client. And then at runtime, we create an implementation of that for you. So if you need to create a GET request that calls out to this service and just fetches a list of blog posts, then we will create that implementation at runtime for you. So just create an interface with some methods, and you are now, you have an HTTP client to call out to other services.
It's like Spring Data, but for REST services.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh,
it is
the
nice.
things I could
really
do.
Nice.
Yeah, no, I've got a number of services, and it's always been, as much as I loathe SOAP, that you could generate so much of the client where it basically turned into, a remote method call, an RPC type of interface. And, with REST, it was always simpler just to deal with it, but you still ended up writing most of the client code yourself. So now you kind of get that RPC love feeling with the exchange. So, and then there's ways to customize like which verbs are getting called and things like that through other annotations. So, I mean, it seems pretty extensible and customizable.
So like there's just like kind of like if you're in a MVC REST controller, we have the request mapping annotation, but there's like specialized verbs for or specialized annotations for that. Same thing over here. There's like a get exchange, a post exchange, delete exchange. That's how we know what type of request to create. You can pass in like parameters, dynamic parameters. There's like a base URL, and then you're passing in like the path that you want to append to that URL. In that specific method. So yeah, there's a bunch of ways to kind of customize it and do what you need to do. So it's a lot less code. Now I don't got to go look up REST template and see what methods are there and figure out which parameters I got to pass in there. And I always had a problem with like returning a list of something. I had to like create a new parameterized type of something to return that. It was fun, but this is so much easier. So.
Look forward to trying that out. I have a number of use cases that might fit into.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And speaking of it, other things that are sort of pragmatic and just kind of useful, but maybe not big headliner things are, the other thing I end up doing during most of my projects is creating standards for error messages and things like that. And I didn't even realize that a bunch of smart people got together and did an RFC on it, RFC 7807, detailing problem details and error messages. So you actually have kind of a standardized format to give more descriptive error messages where, you're not defining your own format each time. And that made it into Spring Framework or not Spring Boot, Spring Framework.
Yeah. And that was great to see. And again, I think, like you said, it's nice that people got together and kind of define the specs. So we're not all defining our own specs, but now we have this kind of consistent way of defining error messages. And I guess, there is an RFC for it. Don't read the whole thing. I mean, you might fall asleep towards the end. The very beginning, though, is a couple paragraphs that are really good and talk through this exact problem and what it might, when you might come across it. And the example is like, hey, what if I throw a 403? Somebody gets this error message back and they go, okay, well, why did this happen? Like you've told me nothing else. So like you said, in that instance, you're going to go off and define your own way of responding to that, sending back that error messages. Now there's a kind of uniform way of doing that with the response problem details. So yeah, we just made it easy to go ahead and create these problem details in Spring and go ahead and return to the client car, whatever that format looks like. So there is like a fixed number of fields that you can add to this, but then there's also ways to add additional data to that response if you need to.
Yeah, very, very cool. No, another thing just to kind of bring to the project where I don't have to do that design work. Someone has done it for me.
Yeah.
And just say, hey, just use what works out of the box.
Yeah, instead of so this and that is the problem. This is sliced every which way, like depending. It's I've seen one way of doing it per service that I've been. Sometimes I see two ways of doing it on the same service where some of them is they return an actual well-formed response, but with an error part, or some of them are like just throw the 500 and good luck with that. Others like this is kind of nice because it's like, it's kind of like this is what you expect if you see anything that is not a 200 as part of it. Let's see, like I'm gonna see how easy it is to push adoption of this in my neck of the woods.
It's pretty easy to create, at least on the Spring side, right? If you want, the best place to look is obviously in the documentation. There's some really good examples of when you might want to use this. Reading through the spec will give you a little bit more of an overview of that, but more importantly, how to do it in Spring. Pretty easy to do. So,
perfect.
Yeah. So, I mean, with all of this, is there anything that I guess you would say big that has maybe been deprecated? I know that one of the big things in Java recently is deprecation, or is it kind of like, hey, you know what, we're still rolling through with everything that you've had before?
Yeah, I think Spring's been pretty good about that over the years, not, kind of deprecating major things so that you can upgrade to the next version. I think one of, in every little if in every project that you may use in your applications, those are the things that I would look at. So while we're talking about that, there is a Spring migration guide out there for anyone who wants to move from like 2.x to 3. So what are the things that you need to look out for, right? I think one of the biggest things is, try to get yourself up to say like 2.7, the last release before 3, before trying to jump to 3. Get up to 2.7, get on JDK 17, then make the jump to 3. In the migration guide, they also talk about some of the other projects that you may have to kind of deal with. So Spring Boot 3 now includes Spring Security 6, and there were some deprecations there. So if you've ever configured security in your project, we used to extend this web security configure adapter, and that's how we would kind of configure security. That has been deprecated and actually removed. So we moved to like a more component-based model. You got to configure some beans to set up your security filter chain or to set up your user details. So those are done as beans now in a configuration class. So little things like that, that migration guide goes through and says, hey, if you use security, these are things that you want to look out for. So on the Spring Data side, I know Spring Data is a big project in our ecosystem. We've moved to Jakarta EE 9 and 10. One of those changes brings us up to Hibernate, I think 6.1. So I've heard some customers have some issues from moving like from 6 to 6.1. So those are things that you want to look out for. That migration guide is probably a really great place to start to see, what that migration path looks like.
Yeah, I think a lot of those things, like the compiler, will help you on that too. Your code literally will not work until you change those things.
Yep.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, right. That is helpful. I mean, another thing, I was just looking at the Spring MVC side. So no more tiles and FreeMarker, huh? You gotta use
your losses somewhere.
all of the skills that I learned in the late '90s are going away. No.
Local feature support. Oh, come on.
I used to love Apache tiles.
Yeah.
JSPs. But yeah, no, that's good stuff.
Yeah, I think while we're talking about it, I did mention Jakarta EE 9 and 10. So we've made the move to, at least through providers, we're now supporting Jakarta EE 9 and 10. So for just a kind of quick backstory on that, Jakarta used to be Java EE for Enterprise Edition. So this used to be the way that you would do enterprise development in Java, right? That was owned and governed by Oracle for a long time. At some point, the APIs in that packet, in that namespace, kind of got stagnant. There was no work being done on them. The Eclipse Foundation came along and said, we'd really like to take ownership of that. Oracle said, okay, great, you can. There's one requirement there. You need to rename all of the packages, all of the namespaces that are JavaX dot something to something else. Name it whatever you want. So the Eclipse Foundation settled on Jakarta. And so that's one of the big things. When we move from something like Jakarta or Java EE to Jakarta EE 9, that change was simply the namespace change. So we as a framework provider had to go through our entire code base and change anything that was JavaX to JakartaX, right? Or Jakarta. And so that when we see something like Jakarta EE 9 and 10 is supported, 9 is simply that namespace change. There was no evolution of the APIs there. Where we can, we've opted in to use Jakarta 10. And so one example is Tomcat Embedded Server 10.0 was end of life already. So 10.1 10.1 is now the one that we want to be on. So we had to, make the move to Jakarta 10 there. So any of those providers that we can kind of move to Jakarta E10, we do. So that's something to look out for too when you're making that migration.
No, and that is if you're if you were using the older versions of Jakarta, that is these are important. I guess all the grids are important, and the reason again is not necessarily because you want the new features, but a lot of these have security updates. Yeah. So even when you if you are running on Java 8 and are dreading to move into 17. Do remember that 8 has been end of life, and hopefully you have a contract somewhere to give you the new versions of the JVM
right
that you over. But yeah, yeah. So if you're using Jakarta, move. Now that there's the support on Spring, it's
Well, I'm excited now too, because again, these APIs were just stagnant for years, and now we get to see the evolution of these APIs, and there's things changing. I did a video the other day on my YouTube channel of just like something that you could take advantage of in Spring Boot 3, and that is Jakarta had a generator type for a UUID now, something that seems like we should have had a while ago. But again, when APIs are stagnant, that's what happens, right? Now they've kind of started adding the support for these different things. And hey, I can use a generator type for a UUID if I wanted to. So cool stuff. I'm excited.
I don't have to use ints anymore. Like
well, again, there's a whole nother discussion to be had about if you should be using UUIDs for database primary keys, but we'll leave that for another time.
Yeah, that's a whole episode in its own. Now, the other one that I see, what can you tell us about observability? I know there were a lot of changes that came in for Spring.
Yeah, so this is a big theme in Spring Framework 6 and Spring Boot 3, and really moving forward. The story with observability has really just started. And so for anybody who doesn't know, we kind of define observability as logging, metrics, and distributed tracing. One of those components, distributed tracing, was you had to bring in another library to do that with. So Spring Cloud Sleuth was there if you wanted to do distributed tracing. We've now brought that into the changes with Micrometer, and that is just all baked into the changes that we have in Spring Boot 3. And the really nice thing about this is the API that we're using internally as a framework is the same API that you could take advantage of. And we've done a lot of instrumentation in the framework itself. So if you're using something like a REST template or a web client, we are collecting metrics on that for you already. There's ways to like enable it in the settings, and depending on how many times you want to collect these metrics, that's all configurable. But we're collecting these metrics now. So if you want to find out, what HTTP calls are happening under the hood and get data on that out of the box, you can get that. And I think what I'm really excited about, again, is it's just this unified, it's a simple API. You can use it in your code. We use it in the framework code. And this is only going to get better as the story kind of improves.
No, and because I know like usually metrics and distributed tracing are used to be like two different things. Like, for metrics, then you figure out your whatever it is, your Datadog or stats and stuff, right? Or distributed tracing, same deal, but you have to go through another another route. You have to configure now your distributed tracing, like who you're going to report to,
Yep.
For the longest time, like Expedia Group created Haystack, so we used that for a while.
Yep.
And I think these two things are like, and you kind of do the same kind of things. It's like, I need to set up timers. I need to set it to publish things and all that. And it seems like now, like in the new in Spring Framework 6 through 3, this is now just like one concern that you just configure it once, and suddenly what it's already available. It's just you have to enable it whatever you want it. And that's going to be so much. I'm going to remove so much code just because of that. Yeah.
And it's very flexible. It works with whatever tools that you're used to working with, your Grafanas, whatever tools that you're used to working with. We probably have support for most of those. So,
yeah. If not, then I'll poke Jenny Ivanov to fix it. So I know he works on that project. He's local to Seattle, so
nice.
Yeah. Oh my, that has been a long list. I wonder, have you have anyone make the move and talk to you about after the move? Is it, or as migrations are happening, if they have any thoughts or comments that you collected?
No, I haven't specifically. So we have a show on Tanzu TV called Spring Office Hours, where myself and my coworker Deshaun, we basically hold an office hours every week and kind of get community feedback, like, hey, what questions do you have? What can we answer? How are things going? And yeah, we have heard, on some cases, it was a very easy migration. In some cases, things come up like the Jakarta namespace change, like, they run into some issues there. Again, issues with Hibernate 6.1, how, things that are going on there in that external library. But for the most part, we've heard nothing but good things. We heard adoption is going really well. So yeah, I'm excited, not only about Spring Boot 3 and Spring Framework 6, but as the year goes on, I'm looking forward to hopefully Project Bloom, virtual threads in Spring Framework 6.1. So
yeah, salivating because it's getting closer. It's been teased out for years. So that's and having like a Spring Framework support for it, that's gonna be a big win.
Yeah, it's gonna be awesome.
Yeah. So as for those who are, I'll say like if you have been working on a code base that that not only has Spring, but you have essentially hooks into other parts or other libraries, and that is usually where the risks tend to like sort of like hide, right? Like you upgrade to 17, but suddenly you have a version of Apache Ignite that was not for 17. It kind of runs, but it has issues. But that is the it's like if you're purely using boot, and that is like your dependency list is this short because it's all Spring framework stuff.
Yep.
Great. But for more projects, which is usually like evolutions of, like at some point in time, there was a project that had Drop Wizard in it. And they run Drop Wizard and Spring framework at the same time for a while. And then there's like this Drop Wizard part that's still in there that, we finally at least we finally removed the Drop Wizard endpoints. But it's like, you do need to make sure that either if you keep the library to make sure that the library works for 17 and then you're not going to have any issues, or, just it's time to really pay some tech debt and remove that or update. So that is, like slapping in, Spring Boot 3.0, running it. If it runs, doesn't necessarily mean that you're done.
Yeah. But as you said, if you look through that POM and you've declared a version for something, that's the first place I would look, because if you're declaring a version, it's because we haven't declared a version that is compatible with it yet. So you're probably doing something outside of the norm there.
Yeah, right. There's a lot in that parent POM just that you get to inherit if you use it as is.
Well, and the thing is, like, sometimes it could be like it could be very well benign. Like we sometimes there is a security update that maybe the Spring version that you were looking before didn't have it yet, right? Like there was a release of Log4j and all that stuff, and you said I want to use this version, right? And it might be something that, every time, actually, it was kind of interesting. Every time we have to do one of those, we do document what the CVE was, just because that way we can go back and say, oh, it was because of this. We don't have to worry about it. We can remove it, right? And then just get the later. But there might be others that are like, some notorious things I know, like I run into is like gRPC stuff. The Google libraries, that make sure that you're using the right ones or the later ones. Or that you can upgrade because that might bring other things in, right? Same with Jackson, JSON, and all the XML compilers. So yeah, but gosh, this is fun. There's so many toys. I do have like I think 2 services that are purely Spring based. So there's nothing else but Spring things. So those are going to be the first ones that I'm going to like see how it goes, because we do have it running on 17 already. So it's
you're halfway there then. So the hard part's done.
It's that 9 that 9 version was
get past that and you're all good. There's now finally enough goodies where it is like going past 8 it's significant, right?
God,
there's so many things in there to go to 17 with, and there's so many things, as you mentioned, that the Spring team is now getting to enjoy. So
Yeah, and I tell people on the road all the time, like even if you don't take advantage of any of the language features, just upgrade alone for the performance and security updates. That's all you need.
No, the garbage collectors are getting better.
Oh, yes.
The memory profiling is getting better. Like you can literally just reduce if you're using a cloud provider, which a lot of us are. You can reduce like 10% of your billing just by upgrading. It's like didn't change the line of code, just upgrade the JVM.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh, Dan. It's been so great having you here and sharing all these goodies with us. You get us all excited to try it out. And by golly, I'll try it out before the end of the week. And yeah, no, definitely. Thanks so much for being on our podcast and sharing with us all these good things about Spring.
No problem. Thank you guys so much for having me on. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope we can do it again. And I'm looking forward to meeting you guys in Atlanta for DevNexus. So looking forward to that.
Yes. For those who don't know, we are actually traveling to DevNexus to record a live Java off heap. We always say like Pratik and Vince have not learned their lessons. They keep inviting us back. So it's like it's gonna be great. We're gonna have trivia. We're gonna have fun, and my gosh, it's on this side of the ocean, one of the best, essentially conferences you can go for Java and essentially Java and web, right? So yeah, we'll be there. If you find us, just say hi. We would love to hear from our listeners. And I think that's it for this episode of Java Pop House. Thank you so much. Yay!
Sweet. That was painless.
Usually is.
Yep.